A nation can survive its fools, and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within.
They've been wrong about the wars. They've been wrong about jobs. They've been wrong about everything. The question is, are they stupid or do they have a plan? I actually think for the most part, they have a plan, but some are not too smart.
Welcome to the Horrible Deplorable Show, the anti-globalist America First program dedicated to dehoaxing the media and destroying the narrative. Here's your host, the founder and editor of the Daily Stir, Matt Wingard.
Welcome to the Horrible Deplorable Show. I am Matt Wingard, the Horrible Deplorable, and with me as always is my friend Doris. Hello, Doris.
Hello, Matt.
We want to welcome the Gab community, and you can find this podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, the405media.com, where we're on Saturday and Sunday evenings at 5 p.m., and disobedientmedia.com. If you like the podcast, please give us a good review. So this week, it's been about a week since the healthcare vote. And the first thing that has to happen at the top is that I have to recognize Queen Doris as being correct when she predicted that the Senate would not pass the healthcare bill. I believe that it was impossible for them not to, but never underestimate the grudge that John McCain holds, small, tiny man that he is. Doris, how did you know?
I just couldn't see them getting their act together when there had been nothing happening so far that concluded that.
Well, no one should be shocked by McCain's betrayal. Anyone who's followed McCain's career understands that he's a small individual, that he has basically made a career out of having been a POW in Vietnam. I think we can agree that that's an honorable thing that he suffered through those years. But it's a little bit overwrought, the attention that he gets for that. He wasn't a particularly successful naval officer, and he did get shot down, and then he was a POW, and he had an opportunity to leave because of his father and grandfather's connections. The North Vietnamese wanted to let him go, and he refused to leave because the other men were not let go, and his back was broken while he was there. I don't think anyone should take away from him the suffering that he endured on behalf of his country. But almost nothing that he has done since he returned has been what I would consider to be honorable or praiseworthy. He used his POW hero status to get himself elected to Congress and then ultimately to the Senate, where he has been, in my opinion, the worst Republican senator in the entire 150-year history of the party. It's actually about almost 160 years now.
Well, as a man, he is probably a fine man. However, he is a disastrous politician.
He came into the Senate and was embroiled in the AB scandal, which was a bunch of bribery that was going on around the savings and loan scandal of the 1980s, barely managed to extract himself from that and not get brought down with a bunch of other politicians, and then proceeded to suddenly, over time, become very popular among the liberal-leaning mainstream media in D.C. Now, ask yourself why that occurred. My summation is that John McCain made the decision that he was vulnerable because of the AB scandal, and he became basically a leaker. He became a source for a lot of D.C. reporters to curry favor with them. And he has undermined the Republican Party his entire time in office because he's the person they could always go to when they wanted someone to criticize what Republicans were doing. He was reliable. And this was sort of his protection racket. This is how he got favorable media coverage, was by selling out everyone else in his party. And I strongly believe that McCain and his staff and his vast swamp creatures were probably oftentimes the people that could be counted on to leak information about what happened behind closed doors when Republicans got together to strategize or to make plans. I believe that John McCain has been undermining the Republican Party the entire time he's been there. That is not noble. That is not honorable. That's pretty wretched. It's pretty low. And in my mind, if you spend your entire life By the way, I don't think he's a good man either. He has a reputation for having a foul mouth. He's cussed out most people there. Almost everybody in D.C. who's there for any period of time has some story that involves John McCain and his mouth. And he seems to be, from all I can tell, an unpleasant person. He ran for president back in 2008. And other than picking Sarah Palin, which is the one thing I'll give him some credit for, he did that out of desperation. Those numbers were low, and he knew he was not popular in the base, and he picked somebody he thought would galvanize the base to him. And that was true, because in 2008 I voted for Sarah Palin, not for John McCain. But he lost, and he ran a terrible campaign, and his inability to run a functional campaign gave us Barack Obama. You could argue that based on the economy cratering, probably the Democrat was going to win no matter what. So again, I won't entirely fault him for that, but he really doesn't have a lot of successes. The one piece of legislation, most famously, that has his name on it was McCain-Feingold, which was the bill to curb free speech in the name of campaign finance, which didn't solve anything, and I think John McCain always knew it would never solve anything. It's the textbook version of a bill that is very pleasing to elites and to the DC because it appears to be doing something about money in politics, but it really never did anything about it. But he got a lot of credit for that, and a bipartisan bill with Feingold. Again, just always selling us out, always thinking about himself, not a conservative, and, a liar too. I mean, constantly playing that game of undermining us for 3 or 4 years, and then when his 6-year term is about to be up, he suddenly gets very conservative. Classic example was the last election cycle, when John McCain, quintessential swamp creature, was suddenly running ads in which he was, because Trump was now the nominee and Trump was popular, McCain's running ads in his primary because he's desperately trying to survive about how we're going to build that wall. We're definitely going to build that wall. And we're going to repeal and replace Obamacare. Neither of which he believed, we clearly understand. And anybody, frankly, I don't have any sympathy for Arizona voters, Republicans, who believed that, because he'd been such a hoaxer and such a liar. You had such a long paper trail on John McCain telling you exactly who he was, and he barely won that primary against Kelly Ward last time. And it's too bad, because that now we can look back on that election and realize that Kelly Ward would have been a solid vote to repeal Obamacare, and we would have been able to move forward. So elections have consequences. That was a very thin primary election, and it could have gone the other way. But no, while I'll certainly be willing to give John McCain props for his service in Vietnam, to the extent that he was a POW and he refused to leave while the other men were there and he was injured. But that's the limit of it. He should never have gone into politics, because John McCain, the politician, I believe, has been a horrible failure. And as I said, the worst Republican senator I can think of. I may not be a complete expert in history. Maybe I don't know every single Republican senator, but I would still place him below those who've had to resign in disgrace.
So since McCain won't be with us for the next election, so who's going to succeed him?
Well, it's interesting because Arizona's going to get a chance to completely revamp their delegation here in the next 2 years. It's a situation that does not come along for state Republicans very often, because of the staggered terms that people run on. But Jeff Flake is up for re-election next year, and he's got Kelly Ward coming after him. And by the way, I think McCain absolutely doomed him with that vote. There was this moment recounted by the mainstream media on the Senate floor before McCain took the vote, where he was sitting with Feinstein, the Democrat from California, and McConnell and Cornyn and others were worried about where his vote was going to be. I guess they knew or had word that he wasn't going to be a yes vote. And they sent Jeff Flake over, his Arizona Republican compatriot, the junior senator from Arizona, to talk to him. And Jeff Flake, this is all recounted in detail by reporters who are watching from the gallery. Jeff Flake goes and sits next to McCain, who has sort of turned a little bit away from him to be talking to Feingold. But he's using the body language, that you usually do of, I'm sitting here, I'm waiting for you to finish your conversation so that you'll then turn to me and we can have a conversation. And McCain began to further turn away from Jeff Flake, so that eventually he had his back entirely to Jeff. And Jeff, after a little while, it became clear he was never going to disengage from Feinstein and have a conversation with Jeff. And eventually, Flake just sort of looked over to Cornyn and McConnell and shrugged his shoulders and got up and walked away. I think that reads as the epitaph of Jeff Flake's Senate career. Ineffectual, in the shadow of McCain and then ultimately drugged down and drowned by McCain on his way to his deathbed, because he's doomed him. Jeff Flake was and is a never-Trumper, but he's tried to be very quiet this year going into his election because he, I think, rightly fears the Trump voters. And McCain has doomed him, and he should. So my point being that Arizona has a chance. John McCain is unlikely to live the next 2 years. He has a very severe form of brain cancer that has a very thin prognosis. So this means that within the next 2 years, Republicans in Arizona could have 2 completely new senators. That's an exciting prospect for Trump supporters in Arizona, because you can replace Jeff Flake with Kelly Ward. And then you need to make darn sure, though, and you've all got to be doing your footwork in Arizona right now, that you have a congressman or a candidate ready to go that you expect the Republican governor to appoint in McCain's position, because that person's going to have the pole position for the special election that comes around. I'm not sure what the rules are in Arizona. Maybe it will sit empty while there's a very quick snap special election. However it works, somebody's going to very quickly get that job. And if you're a Trump supporter in Arizona, you need to be working right now to have that ready to go and not let the NeverTrumpers and the McCainites that have some power in Arizona don't let them get their ducks in order and outmaneuver you when this happens. Because once McCain either passes away or he makes some sudden announcement that he's going to resign due to his health, things are going to move very, very quickly. I guarantee you by that moment, the decision will already be made who is going to replace McCain. Those conversations are going on right now. And if you're a Trump supporter in Arizona, you need to be a part of those conversations. So this is a call out to all of the Trump supporter in Arizona to vastly improve the Senate caucus by the time they come back in after the 2018 election, and make sure that we have 2 solid Trump supporters in Arizona. That'll go a long way towards changing the conditions among the never-Trump crowd in D.C. I do want to talk about the next year or so and Conservative Inc. We've talked on this podcast about Conservative Inc. Conservative Inc. is that vast cadre of thought leaders and Republican leaders who all make a living or enjoy the spotlight or bask in the glow of the spotlight, while never actually delivering victories for us, the Washington generals of the political world, if you will. And you saw almost all of them paint a red dot on themselves in the last year when Trump ran, because almost to a person they lined up against Trump. And remember, they all claimed that he was the charlatan, he was the P.T. Barnum. And now that he's actually since January, he's been in a position where he can actually exercise power. Compare him to Congress. Compare him to all the Republicans who said that he was the charlatan, that he was going to wreck the Republican Party, that he was no real conservative. And look at all of the conservative accomplishments that he's managed to do through executive order and through the executive branch. Everything that's within his power to do, he has pushed. And the Republican Congress, which has reconciliation and can do just about anything they want in the House and the Senate, especially when it comes to budgets, they're not doing a thing. You got Bob Corker in Tennessee saying that the president's budget was just a piece of paper. It's a nice piece of paper, and he has no intention of enacting the cuts that Trump has proposed in the State Department. So it is not Democrats, and it is not the mainstream media that is the problem. They are always going to be the left, and they're always going to act like crazy communist types, and they're always going to throw withering abuse on the Republican president of the United States. Absolutely, it's times 10 with Donald Trump, but I think it's because they see him as a man of action. I think that part of what has the left so wound up about Trump, and they pretend it's his style, but they don't care about style because they love that style. They've been using that style for 100 years to get their way. They march in the streets, they throw bricks at police. There's no style problems that the Democrats have as far as accomplishing their goals. But they pretend to have style problems about Trump. I think at the core of it, though, they've understood that he is not a Washington General's Republican. He's not somebody who has a career he's building and therefore he's going to be a good boy and do what he's told so that he can advance up the ladder, as so many Republicans do. Or keep his head down so that the press doesn't treat him too badly, as the McCain types do. They saw I believed from very early on that this is a man who would likely do most of the things he said he would do, and they didn't want him to have power, and that's why they're freaking out. But they don't have the power to stop him. As you're clearly seeing, it is only members of our own party, the Republicans, who have the power to stop him, and they are exercising that power all over. And it is despicable. It's despicable. And we have to seize the opportunities to destroy these folks, to extract them from the political apparatus and to throw them on the ash heap of history. Give them another job. Send them out into the actual free market where they have to work for a living, because they're not helping us. And these opportunities come around in election cycles. And we can't get most of the NeverTrumpers in the Senate right now because they're not up for re-election next year. But 3 of them are that I believe we should concentrate our fire on. And that's Jeff Flake in Arizona, and Heller in Nevada, and Corker in Tennessee. These are 3 Republicans who have to run a primary next year in order to recapture the Republican nomination and return to the Senate. Let me say at the outset that I am not concerned at all about losing these Senate seats. If the Heller seat went to a Democrat, it would not be much of a loss to us. And by the way, we're in a position to pick up a bunch of seats in the Senate. We are very unlikely to get to 60, and we are almost totally unlikely to go below 50 because we're going to pick up some red state seats that are currently held by Democrats. So what that means is it doesn't really matter whether it ends up being 53 or 56. Those numbers really make no difference because you don't have 60 votes to override the Democrats completely, but you have 50 to control the chamber. So I am not worried, but McConnell and people like that are going to freak out about, we don't want to lose even 1 seat. We do not have to roll over and tolerate every NeverTrumper just because we have to hold on to every single Senate seat. We need to improve the Senate caucus. So we need to target people like Heller, and if in the end we lose that seat, we will still control the Senate. And frankly, it's still better. It's still better for us as Trump supporters, people who support that agenda. It is still better to defeat people like Heller in the primary to make it clear that we will not tolerate saboteurs in the caucus.
We just need to weed out the traitors.
So I'm calling on Republicans in Nevada and Arizona and Tennessee. Now, we're going to talk in a future podcast about the House side, and it'll be a shame if the House gets punished for basically the never-Trump problems in the Senate. But the Senate's pretty safe as far as Senate Republicans holding on to it. Of course, they look at that and say, well, it's safe so we can act out and be never-Trump and do all sorts of cowardly things. But that's also an opportunity for us, Trumpers. That's also an opportunity for us, because just as they feel that they have almost no chance of losing the Senate, control of the Senate, and that's why they feel they can act out, and many of them who are acting out aren't even running for re-election next year, so they feel very safe. We're also very safe in targeting never-Trumpers in the primary right now, those who are up, because we can also feel good about the fact that Republicans will not lose control of the Senate. So let's go after Jeff Flake in Arizona, and Dean Heller in Nevada, and Bob Corker in Tennessee. We may not defeat all of them. We have to get Jeff Flake. We have to get him. We may not defeat all 3 of them, although if we did, and this is why it's so important and why, if you're in these states, you need to jump into this fight. If we were able to defeat all 3 of those men in their primaries next year, behavior in D.C. would change almost overnight. You don't have to get rid of all the never-Trumpers. When 50 men from your battalion desert and you capture them and you bring them back, you only need to shoot 1. And the other 49 aren't going anywhere.
Exactly. So take out the 3 traitors, and the people up for election in the next cycle might remember that.
They will get their minds so focused. Frankly, just defeating Jeff Flake will be a big win. But if you defeat all 3, you send a very strong message that you can target them in their primaries and that you will. And suddenly, all of these never-Trump Republicans, and there are about 12 of them or more in the Senate, some of them who are up for election in 2020 are going to get their mind really focused, and you're going to see nice, good little boys and girls behaving themselves and talking about how we need to build a wall and voting for it and insisting that we take a vote on it because they will want to have a strong pro-Trump record before they go into their primary. You only have to take a few scalps. Corker, Heller, and Flake have got to be the Senate targets next year, so let's get busy, folks. I think more and more Republicans are waking up to the fact that it is Republicans within the party who are saboteurs. By the way, even if you're not in these 3 states, you can do some work in your own state. You have NeverTrumpers who have leadership positions in your state party right now. I guarantee you. It doesn't take much to figure out who it was or who it is. There are a lot of people pretending to be Trump supporters right now because he's president of the United States. You have national committeemen and national committee women, in some cases, who are not helpful. You can do some cleanup work in your own state party, and that's important work, and it needs to get done. These NeverTrumpers have shown that they have no intention of getting on board and recognizing the direction that the party is going, which is a Trump direction. They would rather sabotage and wreck the train than let it succeed in getting to its destination. And you can see this in the behavior in D.C. If they can run, some of these NeverTrumpers, I believe, have calculated that if they can run out the clock and stall on the agenda till the next election in 2018, that if the Democrats win the House, then it's all over. Everything's frozen. The Trump agenda can't get through Congress. And, of course, they'll all claim ignorance. They had nothing to do with that. And they'll cry crocodile tears about the House going over to the Democrats. But at the end of the day, they don't want to see, they get to stay there. See, they get to keep being reelected as senators and congressmen. So at the end of the day, they don't really care which party's in control, because it still comes with a 6-figure salary. It still comes with being called, senator or congressman, which is the equivalent of, when you're called sir in England. It's like being a knight of the realm. And they get feted everywhere, and they go to parties, and they get these 5-minute introductions about how they're the greatest thing since sliced bread every time they're about to speak. They get treated like princes and princesses, like aristocracy in this country. And when you're treated like that, you almost don't care who's currently in control of the chamber.
Just as long as you're still there.
Exactly. So we have our work to do. Trump needs our help cleaning up the party. There is a fight still going on. Just because Trump won the primary doesn't mean that the Trump movement gained control of the Republican Party. We have a lot of work to do. There was a lot of work to do in the 60s and 70s getting the Rockefeller Republicans out of the Republican Party when that transition was happening. We're in another transition period, and we are in a long-term fight to flush out the Never-Trump folks from the party, and they need to go. Arizona will be a big test. I do think it's interesting, where are the problems? I don't want to generalize too much, because I know that there are a lot of folks listening who are going to fall into these categories who are Trump supporters. But if you are in these categories, it's on you to help do some work among your fellow folks who are NeverTrumpers. And where do we see some of the problems? There's 2 kinds of oppositions to Trump within the party. Some of it is ideological. The Bill Kristols of the world who really disagree with the nationalist direction that Trump wants to take the party. Less interventionist, totally non-neocon. And it's a lot of the people kind of at the top of the party who are resisting him on ideological grounds. But within the ranks, the rank and file of the party, there are a lot of people who have just style problems with Trump. And we've talked about this. The perfumed handkerchief Republicans who, in the William F. Buckley mode, believe in honorable defeat. I think there are a lot of Republicans who have gotten wrapped up in this idea that, yes, we may be losing, but we're better people than they are. We live better lives. We live more honorable lives. We take more personal responsibility, and we don't use the language that they use, and we don't do the things that they do, and that makes us better people. And sure, we may end up losing in the long run, and they may end up winning, but we lose with dignity. Our reward is in heaven. That kind of philosophy of you just turn the other cheek and you let the other side win, because our reward will come later. This whole noble defeat, I understand it from a religious perspective and from a personal perspective. It has absolutely no place in politics. If that's your philosophy, you need to step out. If you have a leadership position, even if you're the county chair in your party, you need to step down. because it would be as if you were a conscientious objector and you joined the army and you wanted to be a lieutenant leading men into battle. I have no problem with you being a conscientious objector, but you need to be a medic. You need to be over at the hospital treating the wounded. You cannot lead men into battle if you are a conscientious objector. And it is the same thing within the Republican Party. If it is your philosophy that, well, we are better people and we just don't do the things that they do, and that is what defines us, with your nose slightly turned up in the air. Wonderful, great, good. Be a voter. Don't be an active Republican within the party. Step out. Vote at election time and leave the actual political fighting to those people who are willing to engage. Because this noble defeat is a path to nowhere and total destruction. So there are a lot of people in our party who are sort of married to this idea of the noble defeat. And I'm sorry for them. They're very, very good people. But you got to look around and ask yourself, if you're involved in your state party, your county party, if you're involved in politics, you got to look around at your leadership and ask yourself, are they married to this idea of noble defeat? Because if they're conscientious objectors, you need to vote them out. You got to get them aside and get real warriors in their place. That's the only way to victory. Somebody like General Patton may not be someone you want as your neighbor, but he is the general you want leading the tanks into battle. And Donald Trump comes with a very rough personality, and a lot of people in our party are having trouble with his personality. But look at his bulldog mentality. That Patton-esque mentality gets things done and gets victories and bulls through the mainstream press when they try to tear him down, or when they think that by ganging up on him and inventing things like the Russian hoax that they're going to slow him down. If he weren't Patton-esque, if he were Mitt Romney, he'd be buckling by now. And we have to recognize that. So I have noticed that some of the largest NeverTrumps came from Utah. Evan McMullen, who ran this quixotic third-party campaign, got a lot of support in Utah. There was concern before the election that Utah may not go to the Republican. And I think, this is Mormon territory. And I think more than the Southerners or even the Southern Baptists, interestingly, Mormons seem to have a real problem with Trump. And again, I think it's about style. And, he has this whole New York City Queens style, which is just pretty much the exact polar opposite of the Utah/Mormon style. Mormons are usually very nice people, very sweet. They're going to bring the cornbread over to you when you arrive in their neighborhood to say hello. I mean, just the exact opposite of that sort of pugilist, Queens, New York City developer fighting style that Trump brings. And while I am completely sympathetic to it, as on a personal level, it has no place in politics. And I know that Trump has a lot of Mormon supporters. I know he does. But basically what I'm saying to those of you who are his Mormon supporters is you've got your work done. You've got your work cut out for you to communicate among the rest of the Mormon community that, you're going to have to hold your nose and get used to the fact that some of the people we need to send into battle to win victories for us aren't necessarily
like us.
Well, they may not be the person we want heading our church. You have some very nice people running your church. Those aren't the people I would send to Washington, D.C. And vice versa. I wouldn't take the people I'm sending to D.C. and make them the head of my church. I think this is common sense. I think most people get this. But for those of you who are his Mormon supporters, you've got some work to do among your fellow Mormons of, giving them some steel backbone. And again, going back to my point that politics is war without weapons. And if you can get some of these people who want genteel manners to see politics more as warfare, then when they see Trump personalities and Patton-esque personalities, it makes more sense. But of course, if politics is warfare, then you want warriors. And too many people have gotten into this idea that politics is some kind of a debate or a negotiation, where you send your 5 Princeton kids in their sweaters with their beautiful haircuts, and their little bow ties to out-debate the other side. That is not how politics works. That's not how it has ever worked, and it's not how it works today, and it's not how it's going to work tomorrow. I have been surprised that some of the Southerners, who also tend to appreciate a little bit of politeness in a genteel manner, have not had as much trouble with Trump's personality as, say, the Mormon community. But I think part of that comes from the losing. I think that Southerners feel a lot more picked on. Usually talk about the Overton window, usually when someone on the left is going to categorize the clinging to their guns, gods, and Bibles caricature to dismiss a bunch of Neanderthals in politics, they usually pick the Southerner. They don't say the Mormon. So Southerners are very used to, for more than 100 years, of being synonymous with someone's character of a backwards person. So they get crapped on a lot.
Really debased.
And I think that's hardened them up to the idea that, I kind of like a guy who pushes back. I guess what I'm saying is I think that Southerners have a lot more antipathy for DC elites and for the DC press, because they are often the butt of their jokes. They are often the description used. They're the racists, who are the problem in the country. And they're ready for somebody who punches them in the mouth. And because Mormons don't find themselves publicly being used as that target all the time, I don't think they're as mad as hornets, say, politically, as Southerners are. So that's my general feeling about why, when Trump and his Queens, New York personality came along, I think a lot more Southerners were like, yes, punch them in the mouth. And I think a lot more Mormons were more of, ye gods, and aghast at the idea of this man and his mouth. That, I think, describes the difference between the two a lot more. But I hope a lot of folks in the Mormon community are waking up to the fact, I said when Trump originally ran that while he may not be personally the most conservative person we've ever run, he will get more done for conservatism than any of these other guys who are maybe more personally conservative. Because again, he's an actual fighter. And what matters is winning. You can have all the great principles in the world, but if you're not actually winning the battles, it doesn't matter. And I hope that a lot of folks on the right who are very religious and maybe do wince at Trump's personality, I hope you'll recognize all of the victories that he is achieving, that the Ted Cruzes and the Mitt Romneys and the George W. Bushes never got. Even though they may be more church-going and they may definitely be more religious than Donald Trump, he's actually delivering for conservative.
So what is he delivering on?
Well, in the White House, they've had tremendous success. Look at Scott Pruitt, who's just decimating the EPA and rolling back regulations and trying to, that was a nest filled with hardcore left environmental crazies, and he is emptying it out. We've had Republican presidents before, and they have not done to the EPA what Scott Pruitt is doing. So I have absolutely no reason to believe that Jeb Bush and the Mitt Romneys of the world would have changed things very dramatically at the EPA. And Scott Pruitt is great. So, and I use, if you listen to me, I use him as kind of the comparison for everyone else in the cabinet who I think are just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. He's done a lot for Christians, people who are religiously conservative. First of all, he immediately reversed course in the administration's position on all of these religious cases that are making their way through the courts. And he has an outstanding Solicitor General and his whole team at DOJ. He put Sessions there to fight on all of these issues on behalf of people's religious rights. And we've seen a number of announcements from the White House on those issues. He pulled out of the climate accord. I don't believe any other president would have done that. Republicans who were running last year. He put Gorsuch on the Supreme Court, doing exactly what he said he would do. He gave a list beforehand. He was the first presidential nominee ever to put out a list that he would draw from of conservatives before the election. And then he was true to his word, and he picked from that list. And Gorsuch is a great justice, and he's not going to be one of these people who's going to turn on us over time. We're already seeing his decisions, and he's solidly in line with the most conservative members of the court. So he's delivered on that. He is sitting there ready to sign a bill to defund Planned Parenthood, and it is all the religious conservatives in Congress that are not getting that done and to his desk. And he has changed the refugee policy. We were basically admitting a lot of Muslims in, and now they're focusing on Christian refugees. So, again, he may not personally be the most religiously conservative president we've ever had, but as I predicted way back at the beginning, because he's a fighter, because he's a take-no-prisoners fighter. He will get more done for conservatives, and he actually is. And by the way, there are a lot of NeverTrumpers in our party who are trying to undermine those gains as well. So we got to wake up. The problem is within our own party, and we've got a lot of work to do to get those folks out, and they need to be pushed out. I used to think that there was at least some chance that they would come around either in their own self-interest, that you'd have pundits or people in high position who'd realize that this is the direction the party's going, and if I want to stay, I better get on board. Or people who would just say, look, this is a compromise, we're a coalition party, and I'm willing to give a little. But that is not what we've seen from the NeverTrumpers. They are determined to sink the ship. They will scuttle the ship rather than allow it to get to its destination. And that means they have to go. True NeverTrumpers are most of the elites, and then some rank-and-file voters. But I don't think they amount to more than 2 million votes. At the high end, we're talking about no more than 2 million people. But we're talking about a lot of people in prominent positions. And they've got their claws deeply into power, and they're going to have to be pried loose. And we have to purge. I'm sorry to have to say this, but ultimately we have to purge these folks from the party because they've made it clear that they are saboteurs. They're not willing to work even, alongside under the old Reagan 80-20 rule of, we agree 80% of the time, so let's work together. They won't do that. And they have to go. They have to go. So I noticed that Scaramucci, he lasted like 10 days. I think it was not only the foul language with the New Yorker reporter, and I didn't really care about the foul language, but what in the world is he doing having that conversation with a New Yorker reporter? Trump has this same weakness. They come from New York, and they still, in their minds, think that the New York Times and the New Yorker matter. Because among all of their friends, Scaramucci and Trump live in New York, so most of their friends are in New York. And in those circles, the New Yorker and the New York Times are very powerful papers locally. I don't think the New York Times has as much power internationally or nationally as it once did. But certainly, still as local papers, they completely and totally dominate. And what those papers think about you matters to your friends if you live in the New York City area. And Scaramucci, I think he still has relationships with reporters there based on his long time in the business world in New York, and he feels a need to curry favor there. And boy, it cost him his job very quickly, didn't it?
Well, even I was shocked at the language he used. Not so much the words themselves, but the reason or that he even dared to use those kind of words.
I noticed there were some evangelicals who were always NeverTrumpers anyway, but they were used as stooges to come out and call for the resignation of Scaramucci based on his language. Again, that sort of perfumed handkerchief. It's like, I know we're smarter than that. We do all understand, right, that they only clean up their language when they're in front of the cameras and when they're on the Hannity show. Behind closed doors, most of these people have very foul mouths. Maybe not Mike Pence. There may be a few who keep it fairly clean. But John McCain, for instance, is famous for his mouth. The kinds of things that he says behind closed doors to people. I mean, believe me, the F-bomb gets dropped a lot. These men and women are all very familiar with foul language and probably recognized in Scaramucci's tirade, a tirade or two that they've had in private from time to time. It was still foolish of him to have that conversation with the New Yorker. So I thought the most interesting thing out of the whole thing was that as Scaramucci was resigning, Jake Tapper from CNN was admitting that there are members of Trump's administration who are, quote, trying to protect the country from him. So Trump has people in his own administration who believe he's a threat. And this is coming from Jake Tapper, who is absolutely no friend of the president, which means that it's the people Jake Tapper talks to in the administration who are his sources. And this is my point about the NeverTrumpers being everywhere. And they are not working for the team. They are trying, they are, and again, I go back to Barry Goldwater and that Conscience of a Conservative and A Choice Not an Echo, which was Phyllis Schlafly's book, that whole movement in the 60s. There was a reaction from the Rockefeller Republicans, a belief that this was temporary and that they could push the Goldwaterites out. And when Goldwater got the nomination in 64 and then was defeated in the biggest landslide victory in modern American history, basically until Reagan demolished Mondale. A lot of the Rockefeller Republicans thought, see, dismal defeat, and now we will shoot the wounded. We will go around and we will purge these people. And the Goldwater folks ended up in a 20-year fight to purge the Rockefeller folks from the party, culminating with Reagan's election in 1980. But believe me, the work went on. My point being that when you're in these transition periods, the folks who currently hold the power believe you're the temporary ones, as the Rockefellers, who held control of the party in the 60s, believed that the Goldwater guerrilla warfare, the Goldwater front, was a temporary, that it was something that they needed to beat back. And the folks, the NeverTrumpers who control this party right now, are viewing the Trump voters the exact same way. And it's almost identical, because the Goldwater phenomenon really captured the imagination of a lot of the rank and file Republican voters. And it's why ultimately they succeeded, because the base of the party went Goldwater before the leadership of the party did. And because it takes time to push people who are entrenched in leadership positions out, it took almost 2 decades to get rid of all of these high-ranking Rockefeller Republican folks, even though the base wanted it. And we're in the exact same transition period now, where a lot of the base has galvanized behind both Trump's agenda and his style of wanting to fight. And the resistance is coming from the high ground, from all of the Republicans who've built a career out of being never Trump Republicans. And I realize that Trump only came along recently, but I'm using that word broadly. In other words, the genteel sort of previous way of fighting. You've got a lot of people who are senators and congressmen who have gotten there over the course of 20 or 30 years doing it the old way. And they're not going to change because they can't. Their entire idea of how to operate in politics is the pre-Trump way. So that's why transitions take time, because all of these people at the top have spent years getting there the old way. And now everyone at the bottom wants a new way, and no one at the top knows how to do it the new way. And either they can't change or they don't want to change. And it's hand-to-hand combat over the course of a long period of time to get them out. And so we are in a period where we're going to have to push all of the NeverTrumpers out of the party, just as we pushed the Rockefeller Republicans out in the 60s and 70s. We have our work cut out for us. Everybody's got to get involved in this. Kid Rock is apparently seriously considering running for the Republican nomination in the Senate. It's just glorious. I don't even know where to start on how all of this makes me happy. So Kid Rock is pretty grungy, and he is definitely on the non-Mormon side of the Republican equation. And he is apparently polling ahead of any other potential Republican. He's getting like 46% of the vote against everyone else in polling against Republicans. So if he decides to run, he is very likely to gain the Republican nomination in Michigan, where he's from and where he's known as a hometown boy. So he's not just a rocker to the folks in Michigan. He's a hometown celebrity to the folks of Michigan. He's running about 8 points behind Debbie Stabenow. If you believe Democrat polling, I don't. I think there was a lot of hidden Trump vote. There would definitely be hidden Kid Rock vote in Michigan. First of all, he'd get a lot of people who aren't necessarily normal voters, low-income folks who come out and vote for him. So you're going to get a lot of surprise uptick in votes that you don't normally count or survey. And then there are going to be people who are never going to tell a pollster that they're voting for Kid Rock, but they will vote for him. And so I believe that he has a darn good chance of getting elected. Now, no one, if you think the mainstream media thinks that that's nuts and is pulling their hair out, or that Democrats are worried about that, no one is freaking out more than the Never Trump wing of the Republican Party, because he is Trump times 10. He's foul-mouthed, and he doesn't even present well. He has this sort of scraggly goatee. I mean, and the long stringy hair. He looks like what they think trailer trash is, right? I mean, he is the wife-beater wearing image of the sort of backwards Southerner that the mainstream media might characterize. So in no way does he look like a United States Senator. And they would freak out over that. There was this great tweet I saw where Kid Rock was on his private jet, and he'd kind of raised his fists up with fingers extended above his head, and he said something like, wheels up, bitches, or something like that. That was like the quote on his tweet. And someone that I follow on Twitter retweeted that image with the wheels up, bitches thing and said, their tweet was, I'm thinking the Judiciary Committee. And I could not stop laughing, imagining Kid Rock on the Judiciary Committee because of the way that it would freak out the Never-Trump Republicans, who are, again, convinced that we're the sort of noble losers. We have all of the dignified members who don't act like the Al Frankens of the world. And yes, we lose, but we're better than them. And of course, if Kid Rock's elected, that's a totally different philosophy of, I'm not interested in being better than them. I'm interested in winning. And also, the whole idea of Kid Rock's campaign is and I'm going to be very careful in my language, but I think it's important that I say it this way to be clear. It's a giant FU to the DC establishment. It's a middle finger. The fact that the people of Michigan, including the Republicans of Michigan, would even entertain a candidate like Kid Rock means that they have absolutely no respect for their political leaders. None. They see them as liars and hoaxers, and they don't think of them as noble people or in a noble profession or some kind of role models, because they, part of electing Kid Rock, I'm sure, would be they like him, and they would like a sort of average person to be there to represent them. But at the same time, he's like a neutron bomb in DC. It's like, I'm sending this guy because I know how you feel about him, and I want you to feel that way every second of every day. This is a message. I mean, whether Kid Rock runs or not, the fact that he would consider it and that the polling would show that nearly half of Republican voters in Michigan would support him is the message that the party needs to see of how much they are loathed and how little they are respected. And they need to get that message. And I hope that Kid Rock runs, and I hope he wins, because I'm all about neutron bombs in DC. And I think that we need to send a bunch of people there to mix it up and to flush out these Never-Trumpers. His election would not be that unusual. People need to have a little bit more historical memory on this. Back when the frontier was Kentucky and Tennessee and the Ohio Valley, a lot of the poorest Americans went out there for the land, and they're the ones that had to interface with the Indians, and it was a violent frontier as the West was the West at the time was settled. And it wasn't the wealthy people. They may have owned some of the land out there, but they didn't go out there and risk their lives. It was, desperate new immigrants to the country, or poor Americans who made their way out west and roughed it in order to be able to have a piece of land. And out of that came a bunch of myths and stories of people like David Crockett and other people who, fought with bears and fought with the Indians and cut the landscape down in order to make farms and to be able to raise their families. Well, Davy Crockett got elected to Congress from Tennessee, coonskin cap and all. Now, he actually dressed appropriately when he went to D.C., but he was constantly asked to regale everyone with stories of the frontier, and he was seen, he had, his language and his dialect did not fit in with DC. He was definitely seen as a Clampett, a Beverly Hillbilly who had been elected to DC. Now, a lot of people were fascinated by him and curried favor with him, but my point is that it is not unusual for low income or low social status people in the United States to elect some from their own to DC, and those people are treated as outsiders. And I guarantee you, when Davy Crockett and some of these, early Western states, Tennessee, places like that, when they came into the Union and they sent their first senators back, these people were not necessarily seen as the cream of Eastern elite.
This is pretty funny, Matt, because only you could compare Kid Rock to Davy Crockett.
Well, I try my best. Only in the sense, no one's cutting out the wilderness anymore, so you're not going to get another Davy Crockett. But to the extent that Davy Crockett was seen as a symbol of low socioeconomic people, poor people who would cut their way out of the wilderness. They were the ones that saw Davy Crockett as a hero, and people in Tennessee knew him. And these people drank a lot. I'm sure they're going to make a big deal out of whatever drug use Kid Rock might have been involved in. If you don't think these people on the frontier were hard drinkers, and got into drunken brawls, they did all of that. Believe me, if you had TMZ back then, these people would look and appear like Kid Rock in every way, shape, or form. So bring it on. So the House and Senate overwhelmingly passed Russian sanctions bills. I think there were just like 3 or 4 people in the House who voted no and 2 people in the Senate who voted no. So it's veto proof. Trump had really no choice but to sign it and to put on a smiley face. He's already starting to tweet against it, though, about how our relationship with Russia is deteriorating, and you can thank Congress for that. They can't even pass Obamacare repeal. It's great. I love his tweets. But, where is this Russia derangement syndrome coming from? Well, they're bewildered. I think a lot of it is that, I'm going to go back to what I've said in earlier podcasts. When we had the election last November, it was the first time in American history that almost all of the elites lined up on one side. Now, the elites have often lined up, certainly with the Democrats for the last 50 or 60 years, but there are a lot of elites who, especially in Wall Street and other places, who've lined up with Republicans. And whether it's 70-30 or 60-40 for the Democrats, there's still a fair number of elites who back the Republican president. When Trump was running, I would say that upwards of 90% or more of all of the elites, as we would broadly define them in this country, were against Trump. They were either for Hillary, or they were against Trump, or they were pretending to be for Trump because they have some connection to the party and they have to publicly do their duty, but they were secretly hoping and expecting that he would lose, and even though they don't like Hillary, they just didn't want him. That's where over 90% of our elites were. And that was the first time in American history that all of the elites were lined up like that in one direction. And they lost. It was also the first time in American history that many elites lost on election night. So this is a complete decimation of their worldview. They not only wanted him to lose, they expected that he would lose. They could not entertain any scenario in which he won. Everyone went into that election night thinking that it was a fait accompli. So they're bewildered, and they have never really come to grips with what this all says. What they've started to do is generate a lot of excuses, lies that they can tell themselves about why their world was shattered in November. In other words, they're trying to tell themselves lies that their world is not shattered. So the hoax, the Russia hoax, this idea that Russia undermined the election, is a convenient lie that they can tell themselves, which reinforces the idea that, the world didn't really change. We were supposed to win, but the Russians sabotaged it. And in that way, they don't actually have to face the fact that they were rebuked. And again, I'm going to go back to Kid Rock for a second. Half the voters in Michigan Republican Party are willing to vote for Kid Rock. That's the exact same message that was delivered in November. But because they were refusing to hear that, they're bewildered by Kid Rock. Why would half the Republicans in Michigan support Kid Rock? It's the same reason. Because you, Mr. and Mrs. Elites, you are being completely and entirely rejected. There is a loathing, a deep, visceral loathing for the elites in this country, which is being manifested in these election outcomes, and they cannot see it. I mean, it's like having to admit that you're not as smart as you are, or you're not as pretty as you are. I mean, that's a difficult thing for the human mind to do if your whole self-image is wrapped around, I'm really good at this, but you're really not good at it. I think of these singers that come on American Idol and they absolutely cannot sing, and that they are belting out this song horribly, and it's up to the judges to tell them, I don't even know why you're here. You can't actually sing. And you can see it on the person's face. This is coming as news to them. It's like an actual shock, and I'm bewildered by it. I'm like, how can you not know that you're a terrible singer? But this is my best analogy for the elites who don't understand how much they are loathed and how much they are hated. And the message is being sent, but they can't receive it, so they have to invent lies. And the lies are that the Russians stole the election. That has to be. And that's how you get all these elites You can't get everybody in the House to vote on anything else unanimously. But the one thing they'll all come together on, besides voting themselves a pay increase and pulling themselves out of Obamacare so they have their own health care, the other thing they can all agree on is, yeah, the Russians must have stolen this election. We need to put a whole bunch of sanctions on Russia, and they are the biggest threat in the world, because that helps them to avoid the truth about what's going on in politics in the United States. They cannot imagine a political situation in this country that they don't control. The elites, in one way or another, have always controlled. And right now, they don't. And they cannot and will not admit that, so they invent these lies. And that's how you get this stupid Russian sanctions bill that passes. The elites in this country are weaker than they have ever been, at least in modern history. You'd have to go way back. So let's just say, as far as anyone's concerned, that the elites have never been weaker than they are right now. It is up to us to exploit that weakness. Believe me, they will regain their footing. And so, when your opponent is down on the mat, keep punching. I'm using the UFC analogy, not the boxing rules. Boxing is a perfect example of sort of the way the Republicans would fight. There's no rapid punching. No, and UFC is the way you actually should fight in politics, right? You punch, you kick, and when the guy's down, you pummel his head until the referee says he's out, he's passed out, you must stop. But we need to press this advantage. That's the point I want to make, is that within your own county parties, within your own state parties, you need to press your advantage and get the NeverTrumpers out, continue to support the president, and fight these elites. Because if they regain control, I want you to have no doubt about this. If the elites regain control and they are somehow able to push Trump off the stage, they will shoot all the wounded. They will walk through the battlefield, and every wounded soldier on our side will be shot in the head. And I'm using this as an analogy, but my point is that they will run down everyone. They have no intention of compromising. And so when I'm talking about purging them and making this an all or us struggle, they are the ones who will make this an all or us struggle. If we don't purge them, they will purge us. If we don't defeat them, they will defeat us. They give us no choice on this. So, cinch your belt up a couple more notches and get into it, because here we go. I saw that the president has released an immigration plan that with Cotton, who's not my favorite senator right now because he was not a complete yes on Obamacare repeal, and Perdue both came forward to the White House, and the plan basically ratchets down legal immigration from 1 million to about 500,000 over 10 years, and it completely changes the system we've had since the 60s, which has been essentially chain migration, where immigrants have brought their extended family members in. And because most of our immigrants have been low income, and a lot of them have been illegal that we then gave amnesty to, that chain migration has been a chain migration of low income folks into the country. They want to change it completely. The White House and a couple of senators want to change it to a points-based system where you essentially get points for a college degree. You get points if you are an immediate family member, which would be a spouse or underage children of a citizen. Or you get points for making an investment in the country. You get points for being fluent in English. And what that would essentially do is it would invert the pyramid. If you think about the immigration system right now as letting in a few sort of high-achieving folks and a lot of low-income folks in this sort of pyramid shape, a point system, which is exactly what Canada and Australia have, simply inverts that pyramid so that you would have a lot of high achievers coming in your numbers and just a few people who are low-income getting in probably on immediate family status.
What does that mean for the people that are already here that are low income?
Well, it helps. We stop flooding in cheap labor into the country, and you give a chance for wages to rise at the low end. So you can imagine the Chamber of Commerce is not going to be a fan of this because they've been for open borders, and they're part of the Never-Trump establishment that has to be fought. It's a good plan. It caps annual refugees into the country at 50,000. And of course, the Trump folks have basically almost ratcheted down to zero the number of Muslims that are coming in on that refugee program and seeking out Christians who are being persecuted in the Middle East for the program. So 50,000 mostly Christian refugees is pretty good reversal of this whole system and a good achievement. And these are folks who are going to thrive in the United States and do well. I admire that. I think it's an opening salvo. I doubt that bill by itself is going to pass, but it does set a marker for what has to be in any kind of comprehensive immigration bill. So it's a good first step in putting that out there, and I was happy to see it. We saw the film Valerian this week. Doris, your thoughts?
It was pretty. That was it.
Yeah, so Doris and I very seldom see it in 3D unless we really feel that they've put time and effort into a movie that would be worth the extra price on the 3D. And so maybe once or twice a year we'll see a movie in 3D. But I suggested we see this one in 3D because it's almost entirely computer generated, and from the previews it looked like it might be pretty enjoyable in 3D. While the movie was just okay, we definitely recommend it visually. She's right, it's a beautiful movie.
Yes, I agree. We recommend it just to see the beauty of it. Don't expect a story worth much.
It's from Luc Besson, and he did The Fifth Element with Bruce Willis. The story's not too different than the one from The Fifth Element. A little bit of social justice warrior crap at the very, very end, and it comes so late that it's almost easy to ignore it. But if you remember The Fifth Element, that was lyrically and beautifully a very fun movie to watch, just to look at. And Valerian is also stunning. Almost the entire thing is computer generated, and it envisions all of these different worlds, and they're going between them all the time. And in 3D, it was a lot of fun. So I would recommend that definitely as a movie to see in 3D in the theater, especially if you have kids, because it's pretty entertaining from that standpoint. It's not a movie that's going to be remembered in the long run. And I like to think that it was, I call it the non-social justice warrior Avatar. Doris liked Avatar more, but I thought Avatar was just social justice warring all the way through. I mean, it was just a social justice warrior picture from beginning to end. And I actually saw it on a small little screen years later after it came out. And so I didn't really, I saw that it really must have been a very beautiful film, but I was watching it on a little TV, so I realized I wasn't getting that full effect, and all I was really getting was the story, which was such crap. And the nice thing about Valerian is you only get a little bit of that at the very, very end, and it comes as a bit of a surprise. It wasn't even really expected. So the movie was doing very well for about 90% of the time, and was just a lot of fun to watch. And so I recommend that over Avatar a lot more. The story's kind of similar to Avatar a little bit, but you don't realize that until the very, very end. So beautiful movie. It's a beautiful movie. And if you're, we were looking for a way to get out of the heat and get into the air conditioning. So it was a nice couple of hours out in the air conditioning and enjoying the work that, thousands of people did to make such a stunning movie to watch. We are about out of time. This is a labor of love, but we need to grow. So if you like the show, I hope you'll recommend it to others and give us a review. You are not alone. Goodbye, Doris.
Goodbye, Matt.